Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me for episode 19 in the Conversations with Alan series tonight. I'm Alan Locker. I created Conversations with Alan to have open and honest discussions about the rise of hate and the rise of anti-Semitism, with high hopes that it leads to conversations that make us all think about our own place in history and what we can do together to change our country's course and to stop hate in every form. Joining me tonight are Daniel, Patt, and Wendy Weiss. Daniel is a Google engineer and the descendant of 3 Holocaust survivors himself. He was inspired to create an AI-inspired tool while on a 2016 trip to the POLIN Museum on Polish Jewish history in Warsaw. Daniel helped create and launch From Numbers to Names in 2021, which allows users to upload a photo and then suggests 10 other photos with faces that could be a match. His technology has helped add identifications to United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's photographic collection. From Numbers to Names can now search through millions of faces across nearly 500,000 from several museum collections. Wendy Weiss heard about From Numbers to Names on social media and was immediately intrigued by Daniel's efforts to identify lost faces in World War II photos. She immediately threw her hat into the ring to volunteer as the communications director for the organization. Together, they are spreading the word about their incredible efforts to apply artificial intelligence, facial recognition technology to photographs from the Holocaust to help children and grandchildren of survivors find never before seen photographs of their families. Just think of the impact that has. Please help me welcome Daniel, Patt, and Wendy Weiss to Conversations with Alan. Hello there.
Hi.
Thank you both so much for being here. Thank you for the work you are both doing.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're so welcome. I mean, I saw Daniel and reached out to him after his great appearance on The View. I was immediately intrigued. And it was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I, coming from Holocaust survivors, having that opportunity to possibly, find these photographs and make that connection is so powerful. So Daniel, I know it was your visit to that when you were in 2016 to the POLIN Museum on Polish Jewish history. Take me back there and what prompted the idea and sparked all of this.
So that trip to Poland in 2016 was made for 2 reasons. One is actually my mom's family. My mom was actually from Poland. She was born in Poland, and we actually still have family in Poland. And I had never met my grandmother's sister, who was alive at the time, and so that was one of the main reasons for the trip, was to see my grandmother's sister, who I believe was in her 80s at the time. I'd never met her before, and some cousins who I'd never met. And the other part of the trip was really to go back and see where my grandparents grew up. And I had heard all kinds of stories about their childhood. But I wanted to just kind of go there firsthand and see what their environment was like growing up. And so my wife and I took that trip in 2016, and we visited this museum in Poland, called POLIN. It's in Warsaw, Poland. And they have, these walls and walls of photos. And, I think this is the case for a lot of Holocaust museums. There's just very few names in the captions to say who these people are in these photos. And I spent hours in the museum that day with my wife, and I remember thinking, flying back, would I ever see these photos again? And did I walk past pictures of my own family without even knowing it? And I couldn't sort of I couldn't get that experience out of my mind, and it stayed with me for years. And that's kind of how Numbers to Names began, in a way.
There's 2 things that just are having a major impact on me right now. What you just said, I met my grandfather, who died in World War II's brother, I think late 90s, in London for the first time. I had never met him. Sort of that same thing, and we just lost my first cousin, who would have been 63 last week. She has a ton of photographs. I think when my mom died, there were so many old photographs that we have no idea who all these people are. And probably many are people we lost in the war. I'm lucky to have, a picture of my grandfather who died and my aunt, but I don't have many of them. So the impact of that, and the unidentified, the millions of unidentified photographs just is so powerful.
Yeah, I'm curious. Can I ask, like, in terms of the stories that you heard growing up, were you able to kind of, you know, were you able to kind of hear about who these people might be in these photos, or is it hard to kind of?
No, I wish my sister and I had gone through a lot of my mother's old photographs at the time, when she was, we knew she was dying. So we did a lot of great things in her last year. She had cancer. And, I didn't really understand what my mother, I've talked about this before on the show. I didn't really understand the full impact of what both my mother and father went through until Steven Spielberg made Schindler's List and started the Shoah Foundation. And we convinced them to really sit down. And still their memories, my mother was very young, 3 to 8 years old. My dad was a teenager who was separated from his family, but reunited after the war. But did not, he was a very quiet soul. Like, I always knew they were Holocaust survivors, but it was really that impact of seeing the woman in the red coat in Schindler's List for me, which was my mother, because it was that young girl was probably the same age as my mom. And then I've shared this as well. My oldest nephew was born in 1994, around that same time. And from the New Jersey hospital, from a payphone, remember, in 94, she called the daughter of the family that saved her. She lived with them for 2 years. That young woman, that daughter, was the same age as her. So they were really close friends. And my mom was an only child. So that family was everything to her, like it was her, and that's what I learned from the Shoah thing, listening to her. Like, she would go back and visit them, and yeah, it's something you just said too about the one thing is it was a 17-year-old. So the family that saved my mother and her mom had 9 children. So think of that. They risked 11 lives for 2 strangers. And it was their 17-year-old son that went to them to ask them to take them in. 17-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Right? I mean, you have children, Wendy and Daniel. I mean, my sister says it all the time, and we come from, I would not be having this conversation with the two of you if not for the people who saved my mother and father. And my sister says it every day. Like, I don't know what I would do in that same situation. And here, for my mother, that family risked 11 people. And I've come to learn that they did not only take my mother and her mother. At times, my mother and my grandmother lived there for 2 years. Other people came and went, but
oh wow.
I wish I really did. I mean, there are still, I think we're going to get, sadly, from my cousin who just passed, because her mother and father are gone, and her sister is still here, and we all will not know who a lot of these people are in those photographs. There are so many. I have something I call an old family photo. I don't know who everybody is in there, but it's an old, it's my album of old family photos.
It's funny. I have to say that, like, in a way, it's like one of these things when someone has like a terminal illness or something. There's like this feeling of like wanting to have like all of these conversations, or like have these moments where you're trying to almost like cram in a lot of things with limited time. And I feel like there's this when let's say, for example, someone doesn't have a terminal illness or something, it's easy to just sort of like let time go by. And I think with these photos, in a way, I mean, in some sense, I almost feel like there's like urgency to it, even though, they're just sort of sitting there in a box somewhere, and it doesn't seem like maybe the most pressing thing, but it reminds me of, when you find out that someone has limited time, and it's just a reminder that, of how sort of little time there is in general for a lot of things that are so important.
I think that
This,
inspires us greatly, that thought, Daniel, because, we know time is limited with this generation. And I think
completely.
I
But
think
I think
that can inspire under us.
yes, but I think every generation, what I've learned through the locker room and the conversations with Alan, and I wish I had understood it growing up. I hope your kids, Daniel, and your kids, Wendy, will talk to you about everything. To learn our history. I was not a fan of history growing up, and I wonder if that has to do with what my parents had gone through and it not being talked about. I don't have an explanation. I am fascinated today. Wish I knew so much more, but we have an opportunity, all of us, to just have a conversation and learn about your stories. And I think I have this to share later, but photography is one of my favorite things, and I literally document all of my journey with my friends and my family, and sadly have been tasked to put a lot of tribute videos together because I am the one person. But I understand personally the impact of what photographs mean. And it's funny. You just talked about my mom. I mean, the one thing she always, and she wasn't great at it herself, but everybody, and it's harder to do digitally, identify who's in those photographs.
Wow.
She always used to say when I would do it, I started, my bar mitzvah was the first time I got a camera. Start writing on the back of those pictures so you know who everybody is. But think about that. And some of those photographs you mentioned that I do have, there are things that I have. I might not necessarily even have a name, but she wrote the date. So like I know that's of my sister on August 3rd, 1950, whatever it is. But
it's valuable information.
It's valuable information. It's
for
such
sure.
a value. And photographs really are a lifeline, I think, for people. Daniel, talk about, you were talking about the unidentified photographs. Talk about the percentage of those in the museum that are unidentified currently, that is your understanding.
Yeah, so it's something where by some estimates we would say that there's at least, conservatively speaking, at least maybe 60% of the faces in these photos are not identified. It's possible the actual number is closer to like something like 80%, and these are we're talking about 80% or 60% of millions of faces. So it's just it's really sad. I mean, like sometimes I think about these museums where there's all these photos on the wall and on the walls, and it's sort of like there's in some cases there's a very good chance that the person whose photo you're looking at might be alive, or their child might be alive, and there's no identification information, and the people who are in these photos may not have any knowledge that they're in this museum somewhere. And so there's something about that just really struck me, and I thought, there's got to be a better way of connecting the families to the photos in the museum, and having the museum also, learn more information about who are in these photos and what happened, and what were their stories. All of that, I think, on both sides is something that could be done in maybe a better way.
It makes me think of what's going on in the Ukraine right now too, and displaced people and having to leave their homes, and what they're leaving, the history they're leaving sadly behind, which is what we're talking about. These they're leaving all of that behind to be unidentified if it's not, they're not reconnected with.
It's very interesting. There's even I recently came across a story about how it's possible that there's the museum collections which we know about, and a lot of them are digitized, although not all of them. But apparently there's even I didn't know this. There's almost like this underground photo collection that exists throughout Europe, where there's these photos are with families they don't know. The families themselves don't necessarily know who's even in them. These were photos that maybe were actually like candid, unofficial photos taken by people who were there, just documenting what happened. And sometimes there's information in those photos which could reveal something quite significant. And I just came across one story very recently of someone who there were like photos kind of. I'm just thinking about the Ukraine situation. There was photos that were taken, I guess, on the battlefield somewhere or near a camp, and somehow one of like a British soldier came across these photos and took them with him. And they've been in the family now since the end of World War II. And it wasn't until this year that like the grandchild of the soldier, reached out to us and said, we have photos from the war where we think these were photos maybe taken by the Nazis potentially, but my grandfather was a British soldier. It sounds like was able to kind of take these photos off the battlefield or away from the camps and just preserve them for decades, and now we have them. So I do wonder whether, in the case of Ukraine right now, there's like a lot of displacement and so forth. And the technology is, of course, much more sophisticated today, but nonetheless, yeah, it's quite possible. I mean, I'm sure there's still like a lot of loss and difficulty in connecting and finding even family that's alive, maybe in another country or what have you. It's we're watching.
I feel like I'm watching what my parents went through right now in vivid color. We didn't have those pictures in the same way from World War II. Speaking of technology, how long after you got back from the museum did you start to build this?
Yeah, so I remember on the flight home, I thought a lot about this project back in 2016. And I kept thinking, like, what would be the feasible, practical way of doing something? This is before COVID. And I thought, I want to say around 2018, I started working on some code to basically do something to support this museum exhibit experience. We would go to a museum, the museum would you would go into some sort of booth, you would take a photo, and then the museum would kind of help you navigate the museum, and maybe tell you where there's maybe a face that could be similar to yours somewhere in their collection, and you could maybe go and find that somewhere in the archives in person. And that was before COVID. And then when COVID started, I just thought, that it's really an impractical thing to do that. And I still felt like time was of the essence. And so numbersnames.org was started. The website came out in 2021 as a way of kind of just saying, okay, well, maybe you can't make it to the museum, but you could still search through these collections, online from your home.
Wow. Wendy, you saw something on social media. What did you see, and what prompted you to reach out to Daniel when you saw that?
Yes, I saw a Facebook post, a friend of a friend. She said something about being very proud of her brother who's involved in our organization. And I said, let me see what he's up to. His name is Jed Limmer. And I read the post, and it was a link to the article that was in the Jewish Standard, which basically talked about what Daniel had created and what this project was. And something about it just struck me right away. It was helping the greater good. It was the connection to Judaism. It was involving photography, which I also happen to love and treasure. I think I have over 55,000 digital photos. My kids are not happy with me.
We are very much the same. I have probably, that's very close.
I like to document everything. I always have. I feel like time is precious. I love capturing those types of memories and keeping them, still somewhere. And I sat with it for quite a while. And, I'm an empty nester now. I said to my husband, I don't know if I should go back to work. I don't know if I want to increase my volunteerism in the community. And then I read this article, and I said, I'm just going to go out on a limb and ask them if they need help. And, maybe I'll, throw my hat in the ring, as you said, as a volunteer. And I called them up, and Jed said, yes, please. And within a couple of days, he connected me with Daniel, and we had a really nice phone call. And that was it. I was hooked immediately. I heard the project and the scope of what they were doing. I said, sign me up. Whatever you need, I'll help.
Wow. Daniel, I assume I'm going to ask you about the Holocaust survivor Blanche Fixler, who you found on Twitter. Is that how you started to, build sort of, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but like to find people to start searching for their families and things like that?
Yeah, in a way, with Blanche Fixler, in terms of how that all began, really, and Wendy and I were just chatting about this earlier this week. It's interesting. There's a lot of posts on social media about survivors and victims of the Holocaust, and I just thought when I came across Blanche Fixler's story, she's this incredible person in general, and she was also this incredible survivor. I mean, she was like a very young child when the war began, and she was in an orphanage at one point that was bombed like minutes after she left it. Everyone died except for her, and she was hidden in an apartment at one point, and the Nazis were looking for her, and then she was walking through forests across Europe to go to the next place to escape from where she was in Poland. And she also was, I believe she was a 6-year-old roughly at the time, taking care of also a baby, which was her cousin who was born during the Holocaust. Her uncle had died, and so that responsibility fell on her. And so she just was this remarkable person. And of course, this is all during the war. I saw these photos on Twitter, and I just thought maybe there's other photos of her out there. And so I took these images, did a search, and there were 2 very large group photos where we strongly believe that these group photos had her in them, and most of the people were not identified. So there's maybe like a couple dozen people, and maybe 1 or 2 people were identified in the captions, and so I called her kind of out of the blue. I was, she was very, very warm and open to someone who was, a stranger calling about photos that she had never seen before. And so she said she was willing to take a look at them, and that's how that all began. And she's just remarkable. I mean, after the war, she also has this incredible life story. She's just a very special person.
I think there's a lot of survivors like that, after the war, who really put it behind them, however, I mean, just even, my parents moving to the United States and building a life, with a very little education is just amazing to me. When you call somebody though at that age and try to explain this technology, do they sort of, because I think I have trouble sometimes understanding what we're doing right here on this streaming platform, but like,
yeah,
do they get it right away? And
yeah, I would say that Blanche is a remarkable person. She's just so she's extremely interesting and bright, and I believe she at one point spoke like 5 languages or even more than that. And so when I called her up to explain how we found these photos potentially, she was just very she just sort of I think kind of took everything as a very she was just very open and a great listener, and just sort of said, okay, I'd be happy to take a look at what you have. And I think for her to I think in terms of the AI and the sort of the details of it, I think it's something that I mean, I also didn't, I sort of felt like for her the significant aspect of it was that that there were, not only was she was in these photos, but we also didn't know who the vast majority of the other people were in these photos. And without even mentioning that, on her own, she said, well, she volunteered to actually help identify the other people in the photos. She just sort of said, well, I'll try to confirm that that's me, but I'll also do my best to figure out who these other people are. And so I think that there's definitely an AI piece to numbers to names for sure. That's sort of like the kind of how it works. But like there's a very large human aspect to this where, you know, you still have to kind of understand the circumstances and the biographies of the people involved. And if you were there and you were in this moment, I mean, that's of course just drawing from your own memory to fill in the blanks and fill in the gaps. So Blanche was, she identified, like, I believe like something like half a dozen other people in these photos because she was there and she knew them. And that's something the AI could never really do for us. So.
Yeah, well, that's true. You've done this for a number of families. I mean, Blanche, the woman on The View that I saw. What has it been like to connect with these families, to watch them find, you know, a loved one?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that on some level, you know, when I see when they're looking at these photos, it's like a very immersive experience. You know, you're sort of like, you know, I was just thinking about how it's like you're kind of almost in the moment again with these people that you love, that you were close to. And yeah, it's incredible. Like just the still photo by itself, as we were talking about before, it's just incredibly powerful. And I think it really can really give someone this feeling that they're with their loved ones again, which is really special. So it's yeah, for me, I would almost say it's like being able to give someone a gift that's just very meaningful to them. And so that's kind of how I feel about it.
Daniel, you should tell the story of the woman whose mom you found when she was at the end of her Shiva period.
Oh yeah, that's a
great connection to speaking to exactly what you just were saying.
Yeah, it's thanks for mentioning that. There's a person who she's in New York. Her mom passed away last year, and I believe within days of her mom's passing, she found out about numbers to names.
That's right.
Did a search and found a photo that she had never seen before of her mom, who had just passed away days ago. And she was at this camp where she was, this was a displaced persons camp, and she was knitting sweaters, and her mom was an avid knitter. And so this was sort of, it was just, she said, you know, it was just this very special moment for her that she found this picture in this moment of grieving of her mom who just passed away, doing something that she knew her mom loved to do, which was, create these sweaters. So yeah, that's an incredible, yeah, that was an incredible discovery for us.
I think she said something to you like, you've given me one last new memory of my mom, even though she's gone, something to that effect.
Yes.
It was a really beautiful moment.
Photographs, truly, the power of them. I mean, Wendy, I was going to ask you, and part of that is, what are you doing to get the word out? Like this woman I saw it on The View. I know there are things, but the importance, we've mentioned it. We don't have that many more years with actual survivors left.
No, it's a
one
great
that
question.
comes to mind immediately is Lily Ebert, Dov Foreman. Do you know who that is?
No.
Lily Ebert is a 99-year-old survivor. And during COVID, her and her 19-year-old great-grandson took to TikTok to share her story of survival. And she was at Auschwitz with her. She lost, I think, a brother and sister, and then protected her two other sisters. But she is alive, living in the UK. I desperately want Dov because 19 years old, and what he is doing to keep this subject in the younger generation. But it just made me think of her. She's 99, and there could be, she lost her mother, her father, brother, and sister. Right. So I can only imagine, how many. So, what can we do? Tell everybody, anybody who knows.
I kind of do wherever I go. But I mean, obviously, yes, like from a media perspective and social media, we're trying to get the word out best we can that way. I would say on a personal level, honestly, wherever I go, I talk about it. I attend a lot of community events, and I'm always trying to make connections. I try through my synagogue best I can. We only have, I would say, single digits of survivors left there, but we have a large community that has possible family members of survivors. So I'm starting there. Yeah, really, any way that I can, I'll speak, and just say, hey, do you know about this? And wherever I go, I seem to make at least a handful of connections. And that's just, for now, that's going to be good enough. We get wherever we can, as many people as we can, and we're chipping away at this population.
It's incredible. Question about photographs. Like I said, like I have photographs, are in the collection. Do you know, like all of them are from the Holocaust, or does it have to be, is there a way for the AI to be matching?
Yeah, it's actually it's a very interesting topic. There's a lot of collections at the museums where they actually start as far back as I think the late 1800s in some cases, and they're really documenting people who were victims or survivors of the Holocaust, but starting before the Holocaust began. And so yes, and then there are a number of photos where people are in displaced persons camps after the war, and we found a lot of discoveries from those collections. So yeah, it's actually I would say that the period of time that these collections span is actually quite significant. I would estimate it's probably maybe like a 50-year plus or minus time period.
Wow. You also helped Josh Gad connect. Can you talk about that story?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Josh Gad has this he's just so outspoken about anti-Semitism and has been for so long. And, he posted a photo of his grandparents a few years ago. And, he spoke about what they went through. I looked at those photos and thought, well, it's possible maybe that there are other photos of his grandparents that maybe he'd never seen before. And so we did a search, and we ended up finding a photo of his grandmother and his great grandmother. They were photos which were basically, it looked as though that the photos that he had of his great grandmother and his grandmother it looked like they were like these copies where you couldn't really see clearly like what was in the photo. It was like a bit blurry, and so these photos were basically the originals, if you were, and that he had never seen before, and his mother had never seen before. It was a very emotional moment. We got on a call. I shared them with him and his family, and they were, I think for them it was a very emotional experience, and I also felt like it was, it's sort of a private thing in a sense for the family to kind of go through this. And so I kind of shared a little bit about the research that we had done, and like anything that I thought could be new or helpful information to them. And then I just sort of let them kind of talk about it, privately. So yeah, it was quite a it was a discovery that I'll never forget. And they also told me things I had no idea about when we went into this call together. So yeah.
You thinking about that, I mean, because making that connection with the photograph is a powerful thing, but then there are some really awful memories as well, so it's that mixed bag of emotions. I'm sure that this can elicit those types of feelings in people who are who are looking at this. I commend both of you. Both of you are volunteers, and I just wanted to say thank you for doing this work, because it couldn't happen years ago because we didn't have this artificial intelligence. But I just thank you. And there is a link on the YouTube page down below. If you want to make a donation to Numbers to Names, please consider doing so. For those watching, Daniel, talk about the process. I'm going to actually put my grandfather, who died during the war. This is my mother's dad. Where is this picture? So this is a picture, one of those pictures that was in my mother's suitcase, who definitely she knew was her dad and left us, which, I've never met him. So think of that, like, that photograph. My sister just the other day was calling me asking, like, do we have a picture of our grandmother and grandfather getting married on either side? And I said, I don't think we do. We might on my dad's side, because their daughter, who was born after the war, is still alive. So she might have that. But my sister and I don't have of our, grandparents on my mother's side. Anywho, so talk about the process. So now I've uploaded one photo of him, but you can upload more than one at one time, correct?
You can. Actually, Wendy, do you want to chat through this one in terms of how the process works? Because there's two aspects of it. And I feel like...
Yeah.
Sure. So yes, after you upload your photo, you're going to click the search button. And this is the quick search. We have two types of searches that you can do on our website. This one will generate instantaneous results. I believe it's the top 10 matches that you'll see right here. If you scroll through, there's a similarity score. And
how is that? What is that based on?
The similarity score itself is based on how likely the AI thinks that the person in the photo that you uploaded is a match with the person in these photos off to the right here in the right hand column. It's sort of it's just one more data point.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, because when I looked at this originally, unfortunately, my grandfather had a number of brothers, but I would never know, I never met them. I met the one in London in the 90s, but I think most of them were killed during the war, and I would not know if this looked like them for me. If my mother was still here, that would be a different story.
Yeah. And sometimes I think Daniel and I use the tools of, time, place, not just the face. It's kind of like a whole package deal. So for instance, if one of the highlighted faces, you'll see like the yellow square that's around, somebody's face, if that's the person, if there's any sort of data about that photo, where it was taken, when it was taken, sometimes you can piece it together if it's in fact, likely that it is your loved one.
So if I click here for original context, it might give me more information.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, it should pull up data, whatever, if someone donated the picture, to tell you who it came from, where it's stored, any information they have about it will be on there for you. So you can be a little bit of a detective yourself, not just looking face to face and, are the eyes the same? Is the smile the same? But you can look at the where and the when and see if that would ring true for your family.
And I've been meaning to spend more time on the site to do this for myself. But talk about the other process as well. This is the easy search, the quick search.
Right. And then there's an overnight search that's run once per day, where we cross-match your photo with over 500,000 photos, as opposed to the 34,000 in the quick search. And in the 500,000 photos, there are millions of faces that your photo will be matched with potentially. And you'll get results by email the next day. There's no cost to you. It's a free service to anyone who uploads their photo, and you can go through the matches and see what the possibilities are.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, artificial intelligence is incredible, and having the possible, if my mother was alive or my dad, and the possibility, my dad's older sister was killed during the war. So, who knows? I've thought about it many times, like, did she end up somewhere else?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's I heard a story about half a year ago about somebody who they were just doing some genealogical research into their own family and discovered cousins in Poland who didn't know they were Jewish, and that they even had a first cousin who lived out here in California. And this person doing genealogical research in California just sent them an email or called them somehow and just said, I think we're related, and I think maybe he did have some photos. It wasn't of them. I'm blanking on the what he was able to share with them by email, but basically they put some missing pieces together and were able to figure out that they were related. And they didn't know that they were related, and they didn't even know that they were actually all Jewish, living in Poland, and just and that this happened like 6 months ago. So, I mean, these kinds of long lost family connections are still happening, even now. So, it's possible for the technology to help with that. And I should add just quickly that in terms of the AI, really it's sort of indispensable in this case, because if you were to do the alternative thing of manually going through 500,000 photos, I mean, even just doing it one time, one person would have to spend,
hours,
months doing that just one time to do.
Well, you think about the research that we had to do back in a library, and what we can do now using a computer. And I meant to put the numbers to names.org up here just so anybody who has it can go to the site and try to identify photographs as well. Can you talk about the educational experience you were trying to create for students where they can contribute to history in the present?
Yeah, sure. So it's our hope and plan that in the next, I would say, 3 to 6 months, we are going to have numbers to names in the Holocaust curriculum in schools around the world. We've had contact with an interest from schools here in the States. I believe Georgia a school in Georgia has reached out to us. We've had people in Australia, England, Canada, who are very interested in using our technology. We've piloted so far with Fairleigh Dickinson. And
my alma mater.
Yes. And we plan to continue to partner with them. We have a student or two now doing internships with us, and we're going to continue in the summer and the fall. And the beauty of it is that this can span and be used in 3 different disciplines. It's being used in the history department, the computer science department, and the photography department, in terms of arts and sciences. And it's just a great way to educate about this time in history without the conventional, lecture and reading. It's hands-on. It's, they can be our visual fact checkers, the students. They can look at the photos and they can do the matching, and they can see from person, time, place, if this could be possible historically, that this photo matches this photo. So it's very exciting. The schools seem to be really thrilled about the prospect of using it. Our director of education, Nahama Mursky, is working in an all-girls school right now in Brooklyn. Is it, Daniel? Is it Brooklyn?
I think maybe Queens. I'm not sure.
Queens?
Brooklyn or Queens.
One of the five boroughs.
And she's using it with her students right now. And she said she's having fabulous results where the students are so excited to learn and soak it in and have this, non-traditional way of learning about history.
Well, that excites me that we're bringing Holocaust education into a curriculum rather than taking it out of, like so many are trying to do.
Absolutely.
That is, continue that great work.
If I could just add one quick on that, that I think is in terms of Holocaust education, I think one other aspect to that I think is sort of that's always been really top of mind for me is the feeling that you have when you find a discovery, and you could be, if you're, let's say, for example, you're not a Jewish person, or you don't really have a connection to this part of history. I feel that there's something that's really unforgettable about finding a discovery and being able to share it with somebody else who might be a descendant, or could even be the person who's alive today. I feel like that's something that, in terms of a classroom experience, really could stay with you. And again, it's sort of like very in the moment, very, very present. And, so I think in terms of Holocaust education, it's something like Wendy was saying, it's just a very different kind of learning experience.
To add to that great point, we were contacted by someone, I want to say it was Iowa, and the teacher happened to be Jewish, but he said to our staff, he said, my students don't know what a Jewish person is. They've never come across anyone who's Jewish. So for them to then have this exposure and education, is so important. That's another, added extra bonus to bringing this into the classroom.
It reminds me of my interview with Matthew Berger from the Stand Up to Jewish Hate, talking, it really is about education.
Yes.
Meeting, he even, talked about it with, both he and I are gay, and there was a time where people used to use slurs for gays, and it took education, and which was really impactful for me to hear that, like, because I grew up in the 80s when there was no representation, and I've seen the change. And so it was fascinating to hear that talked about in Jewish and anti-Semitism education, because somebody not knowing a Jewish person or not knowing a Black person or a gay person, it is about educating oneself. And, it is great work. And we have to keep, and these photographs in some ways keep these memories alive. And, I talk about my parents' stories where I never used to do that, but it's now more important than ever. Daniel, you're the child of 3 Holocaust survivors. I mean, that's,
I have 3 of my grandparents were survivors. My dad's mom is 92. She lives in New York, and the other 2 have passed away. But I remembered, it's interesting in terms of education and in my own family. It's sort of I remembered sort of always having this topic, the topic of the Holocaust. It was always sort of in the air growing up. It was never really spoken about directly, or rather, what I should say is, we never really there was no like sit down intentional conversation. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about the Holocaust. It was never like that. But nonetheless, it's sort of I can't think of a time when I didn't know about it. And I think it was just sort of. My grandfather wrote a lot about the Holocaust. He was, an avid writer, and he was involved in like these sort of survivor groups in New York City back in, I think, the 1950s, 1960s. And, so I think it was definitely something where, I always, as I got older, I did ask more specific questions about what happened. And, but, it's sort of, in some ways, the model that I'm also using as a parent. Like I think, like, if the questions are coming from the children, it's a good thing to just answer those questions very directly. And that's kind of how I've been approaching things myself.
And it's so, it's like the full circle of what we were talking about. Take the opportunity to learn. I wish I did. I don't have a full in my brain of why I didn't want to know more, or how they, I think some of it they didn't talk about, I'm sure. My mother smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day because she was a Holocaust survivor. Like, there was effects, definitely. Mental health wasn't talked about, and survivors, if anybody, could have used the benefits of mental health, in every way. But I do think, being able to talk to your children if they ask, and I encourage everybody, ask anybody watching, learn your story from your families while everybody is here. Life is short. And, Wendy, for you, you don't come from Holocaust survivors, but anti-Semitism right now is so prevalent. You're an empty nester, so they're older, but, did you have to have a conversation about it, or do you recall?
I don't recall feeling like I had to have the conversation. I think that, Judaism was always something that was really important in our family, whether it was, religious or cultural. 2 out of 3 of my boys went to Jewish summer camp. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of traditions that were upheld throughout the year. And I think that the biggest discussion came around college life. What kind of setting they were in, what was the Jewish population like, were there opportunities for them to feel involved, with other Jewish students, to feel comfortable being a Jewish student, celebrating a holiday, things like that, I think became the focal point of our discussion as they got older. I'm sure there were educational points before then, but I think it really was at the college age where things were solidified, where they started to take a stand on certain issues and feel that it was important to belong and support our culture and our religion. And there were a couple of times, especially my youngest, where he encountered direct anti-Semitism and had to decide at his university what to do with that and how to handle it. And as much as I know that it's in the everyday and it's everywhere, when he called me to tell me about it, I was still shocked. I was still surprised to hear that in this day, in this society, that, my 20-year-old was deciding what to do in a public place with someone who was speaking ill of his people. Like, I was still taken aback by it.
Understood. Really understood. I think for me, I didn't grow up I don't believe in a large Jewish community. And I think because not having that camaraderie made me, and I was a child of the 70s and 80s, and I do think there was more slurs, whether intentionally or unintentionally used, because of that lack of education we're talking about, or lack of, people in my community didn't know other Jews. So they,
Right.
would throw out what they thought was a non-harmful, but those add up. And so I never really shared that I was Jewish just automatically. I let people guess. And because I had very thick hair, I would get Spanish. My mother's side is Portuguese, so I would get Spanish, or Italian. And it really, as I just got older and learned more, and then really Charlottesville just, made me want to speak up. And like Daniel, one of your grandmothers is 92. I have a cousin in her 90s who I did interview for Conversations with Alan, but I'm not allowed to use it until after she's gone, because there is still real fear of anti-Semitism. And that, I only learned that recently, of that fear. And that makes me really, so sad and angry, because it, I thought Charlottesville was, I think, 75 years after World War II. And I thought my mother was dead at that time. And I was glad she was dead at that time, because I think that would have sent her spiraling to see it so blatant. And, everything you're doing and we're doing to speak up and share these stories, I think just makes people learn a little more about our Jewish experience.
Yeah, I think any way that we can chip away at the hate, the anti-Semitism, the misunderstanding. I don't like that my child calls me and says, should I hang the mezuzah on my door or not? I'm not sure.
Right.
That's very
in
painful.
2023.
Exactly.
In 2023 to ask. Right.
Yes. So anything that we can do, educationally, I think is a win.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing work you're both doing, but I'm going to pivot completely to Daniel. Daniel, when we first connected, you have a strong connection to Guiding Light.
Yes, I do.
Remind me of that connection to Guiding Light.
So it's, I was just talking to Wendy about this yesterday, or the day before. So it's interesting. On my mom's side of the family, as a kid growing up in the 80s, I remembered 80s and 90s. I watched a lot of soap with my grandmother, my mom's mom, and my mom. And so Guiding Light was my grandmother's favorite show, and so we watched a lot of Guiding Light together. And my mom was All My Children was her main show. And so I knew some of the plot lines from when I was a really little kid. And yeah, like, I mean, my mom used to talk about Susan Lucci and how great she was, and yeah, so that was definitely a big part of my childhood as well.
Well, and you know, that's so interesting how we were talking about the connection with photographs, but here, you know, when you saw what I was doing with the locker room and guiding light, that brought back that memory of watching with your grandmother. You know, like there's always
Completely.
it brings that warmth to a place in your heart that you look back on, you know.
I have to say, it's a really fond memory, you know, or those were fond memories. I remember, because it's also like you kind of go back to where you were with them. I remember just being in, you know, in my grandparents' apartment in Florida, and just having a wonderful time with them, and it was just very relaxing and peaceful, and you know, it was like a happy childhood memory. And same thing with my mom. I remember being in New York, and just in the room where the TV was, where all my children were playing. And you mentioned photos. I still remember the opening scene with the
Oh yeah, their book for all my children. Yeah.
The photos sliding in and out of the album.
And Wendy, I wanted to go back and end on a, you know, since this is all about photography, how do you know, you have 55,000. I think I'm not far behind or right there with you. How do you manage that? Do you use a particular site or?
Very carefully. So my home base is iPhoto, and I keep everything in albums there, but I have.
So you have probably the large gig that you pay for, you know, to store.
Yes, I was going to say, I pay for storage, you know, in the cloud. I think it's 2 terabytes of storage. I have an external drive. I have it backed up in, you know, several places just in case.
So I have everything now on Prime, because I don't think a lot of people, and that's why I wanted to bring it up at the end now. With your Prime membership, you get unlimited photo storage. And
really,
you do.
I'm gonna have to look into this.
And it always drives my sister nuts, because we could be having a conversation, or like she just asked me if we had pictures of her grandparents' wedding, and I thought she said grandparents. So in an instant, I, you know, downloaded them and texted her to them, you know, because I have them in, like you do, in albums, in Amazon Prime. I can access them anywhere in the world, anytime. And that brings me and so many others so much joy, because it's, you know, going back to that connection to what photographs mean to people.
Yeah. It's a true comfort to go back and relive memories, you know, good, bad, you know, they're part of life, and they're a wonderful way to just, you know, remember.
And I think it's important to document. Well, you know, just, you know, my husband gets tired, and, you know, I say pose, you know, but, you know,
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. Yes. And when you look back, you'll be happy. You know, Wendy, Daniel, thank you so much. This has really been a great conversation, and anything I can do to help, please let me know.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest in our organization.
Likewise.
Absolutely. Have a great evening.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thank you to Daniel and Patt and Wendy Weiss for joining me tonight to share the incredible work they are doing with Numbers to Names. While we cannot return lives lost in the Holocaust, Numbers to Names can give attention to victims and survivors and help understand who they were by putting names to the faces in previously unidentified photographs. They are rebuilding some of what was broken. They are helping to save pieces of history. As we enter this period of remembrance in Israel and America for victims of the Shoah, may we all do our part to ensure we never forget. For more information or to search the database, visit numberstonames.org. And as I leave you tonight, remember, we all have choices to make in life. Please speak up, do the hard thing, and let's all fight to stop hate in all its form. I truly believe conversations like this can change the world around us. Stay tuned for the next conversation.